chapter 7. Okay. See if any of these sound familiar. Actually, let me do this first. Where did I put that at? See if any of these sound familiar. Stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Stop crying, or I'm going to give you something to cry about. See if that sounds familiar. Here's another one. Turn that TV off right now. I'm going to throw it out the window. I brought you into this world and I can take you out.
That's a little harsh.
Don't make me pull this car over. Any other phrases parents use or you use or barked at you, or maybe you've barked at your kids? Go back to the beginning of that, Chad. Yeah, we'll do that in a second. That you can remember as warnings for not following instructions. Anything that was said?
Because I said so.
Because I said so. It's a good one. Anything else you can think of that would hollered at you? Maybe not hollered at, but spoke sternly. I'll tell one. This is funny. But Dad, he says that he didn't know that his name was Rodney until he went to school because he was just used to being called, "You big dumb brat," which is pretty funny. I don't know if there's any truth to that or not, but. Anything else that you can think of?
It's because your sister did, not that we can.
All right, there you go. That makes sense. Now, the one that is used in our house a lot right now. If you don't quit, I'm gonna get a spatula. All right. Okay. All right. Was their bark worse than their bite?
Yes.
Okay. Some says no. Some says yes. Okay. Over here says no. Okay. All right. God gave Israel clear commands here, right? 10 Commandments, as part of the Mosaic covenant. And he also gave them very specific commands to obey as they are going into the promised land. All right, we've talked about those things. Along with his commands, he warned the Israelites about how he would in turn judge them for disobeying, right? If you don't listen, you're going to be judged. That's what he told the Israelites, right? So we're going to see that. Of course, we know the story well about Achan, but this lesson kind of helps understand the faithfulness of God as he extends essentially his warnings about judgment for not being obedient. All right, that's what this is. Of course, Achan found out the hard way. All right, Chad, go ahead and bring that picture of a wolf up there. Should be the first slide. If you see this, right, if you walked up on this, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 obviously being extremely serious, 1 not being as serious. How serious are you going to take threats from that wolf if you walked up on it in the woods or it came close to you? 10, right? Very, very seriously, right? Very, very, very seriously. Go ahead, Chad. Bring the other one up. Now, how serious are you? 1 to 10 are you going to take this threat? Right? Not. Probably can still, if it got a hold of you, maybe claw you and do some stuff to you. But those teeth aren't there, can't bite you as bad. You're not as worried about it, right? You're not going to take it as seriously. What happens when people bark threats but never follow through on them?
You start listening to your
They become more like this wolf, right? Much more like this wolf, right? The threats are there, but nothing ever follows through on it, right? Kind of renders it useless. Achan, chapter 7 and 8 here, believe God's warning about disobediences were no more than just a toothless wolf, essentially. Threatening the bark of a toothless dog. We know, of course, he finds out otherwise. But we see here faithfulness of God being extended to his warning about judgment of sin. Okay? All right, Jay, go ahead there. Bring us the first one. All right, so Achan is going to test God's faithfulness. We see that here in verse number 1 of chapter 7. So let's start there. But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing. Now, chapter 6, we talked about what the accursed things were, right, from last week. Go over to verse 17 and 18 of chapter 6, just to remind us of what this accursed thing is. In the city shall be accursed, even it and all therein, to the Lord. Only they have the harlot shall live. Verse 18, and ye in any wise keep yourselves from the accursed things, lest ye make yourselves accursed, and make the camp of Israel cursed in the trouble. But all the brass, all the silver and gold, and vessels of brass and iron are consecrated unto the Lord, and they shall come into the treasure. So we know here that the accursed thing is what? What should the Israelites not do?
Touch the stuff.
Touch the stuff, because it ain't theirs, right? Keeping the stuff, it's going to be a problem. Ain't their stuff, it goes all to God. Okay? So, now we know, just as a reminder, what the accursed thing was. Now let's go to chapter 7, back to verse 1. But the children of the Lord committed a trespass in the accursed thing. So, how long did it take the Israelites to mess this thing up? Not very long, right? The dust hadn't even settled yet of Jericho tumbling to the ground, and they are already trespassing in the accursed thing. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed things, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. Achan did what he wasn't supposed to, and then who did God get upset with?
The nation as a whole.
Right? It doesn't say that God was mad at Achan. It says that he was upset or angered at the children of Israel. So one man's sin here, Achan, right, is going to lead to the wrath of God on everybody, right? Because God specifically, explicitly told them, don't touch the stuff. It ain't yours. It's mine. So God is going to take Achan's disobedience here and considering it a sin of the children of Israel. The nation was responsible for policing itself. Do you think somebody saw Achan grabbing some of that stuff? What do you think? Probably, right? That would just make sense. Do we see in scriptures anywhere anybody trying to stop him? They were in a covenant together with God, right? And if they disobeyed him, the nation as a whole would suffer. Consequently, they are also responsible for dealing with sin in their camp. Achan's sin here, verse 1, is described as a trespass and a cursed thing. The word trespass that's used there in verse number 1, act unfaithfully or treacherously. The cursed thing, often used to describe sins of sexual perversion, which included adulterous relationships. The person committing the accursed thing was showing a disregard for the sacredness of the covenant. So emphasis, both terms here is an unfaithfulness. So the narrative of the failed attack here contrasts Achan's unfaithfulness with God's faithfulness. So Achan knew here that God was warning about taking the spoils from Jericho, as we saw verses 18 and 19. And he knew he shouldn't have done it. So what reasons do you think that Achan may have had here for stealing from God, essentially? That's what he did. What are the reasons might Achan have used for stealing from God so clearly, especially after we read verses 18 and 19, and they have been specifically told not to? What's the reasons that he may have stolen from God? Greed, okay.
Didn't take God seriously.
Didn't take God seriously. Okay. What else? Anything else?
Not the one who did it.
Thought maybe nobody knew he did it. Thought he was good at hiding it. A couple things that I wrote down. Achan was just one guy, just a few things, just a small little bit taken. Not enough to affect the entire nation. He was a soldier. And as a soldier, maybe he felt like he deserved some of the plunder. Even though he really didn't do anything to get that. Maybe God wouldn't care about him taking just a small little bit for himself. God wouldn't care about that. But by stealing the goods, regardless, Achan put God to the test. Right? That's what Achan's doing. It wasn't so much that he took the stuff; it was that he was testing God, putting to the test to see if he would really bring on the troubles that he said he was going to on Israel for stealing treasures from Jericho. So Achan essentially is thinking, not really, but his actions are thinking that will God really be faithful to his promise about the warnings of us sinning? Because if Achan doesn't think God is going to really do the things that God has promised to do, then take everything, right? Take the stuff, right? God's like, just blowing smoke, right? That's what Achan would have obviously thought, right? Obviously loved Israel and promised the nations such wonderful blessings, so maybe God can be taken advantage of. That's what Achan's trying to do here. So Achan is counting on, essentially, believing that God is going to be unfaithful to his warnings. Although there's been no evidence of God ever being unfaithful to anything he said up to this point. Maybe this time Achan thought that he would be able to steal and plunder while remaining faithful to the promises to bless Israel. So the error here of that belief, the error of that taking on, obviously became pretty evident that was not what was going to happen. Go ahead, Chad. Now we see verses 2 down to the first part of verse 4, and we see Joshua assumes Israel's faithfulness. Verse 2, and Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven, on the east side of Bethel, and spake and unto them, saying, Go up and view the country. And the men went up and viewed Ai. And when they returned to Joshua and said to him, Let not all the people go up, but about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and smite Ai, and make not all the people to labor thither, for they are but a few. So there went up thither of the people about 3,000 men. We'll stop right there for a second. So this battle is over, and the next conquering area is Ai, right, in this area. So spies go to check on it. So we're seeing a pattern here, right? Spies go to, or reconnaissance crew, whatever, the guys, the trustworthy guys, go up to the next area to conquer. It's Ai. They see that not a lot going on there. Didn't have much problem in Jericho. So they report back to Joshua and tell him, right, that not that big of a deal. Shouldn't be hard to conquer Ai. So the terrain here between Jericho and the city of Ai was probably not an easy traverse, okay? Would have included a rise in elevation of about 3,300 feet over 15 miles. So that's pretty steep, right? Especially if you're on horseback or walking on using donkeys or whatever, right? So for this reason, we see again Joshua sending the spies out, and they observe both the terrain and the city, and they come back relatively small. And told Joshua, here it's only going to take a couple thousand guys to take this place over. Sending any more people than that, it's one, going to be hard. Two, it's going to tire out the extra people that probably aren't going to be needed anyways, as they have to make the traverse over. So erring on the side of caution, Joshua sent 3,000 troops and fully expected them to bring back the victory. Now, that's a couple things here that we need to mention. Let's go back in and look. Verse 2. So Jericho has been conquered. Achan has stole the stuff. Joshua is ready to progress on to the next place. Sends the people out to spy. They come back and tell Joshua, not that many people were going up there. Verse 3, right? Make it not all the people to lather thither, for they are but few. And then after that advice is given, what does Joshua do? Sends the couple thousand, or sends the 3,000 men. Full stop. First thing, what does Joshua not do?
Consult God.
Right? You don't see that there. Right? There's nothing in there that says that he consults God. There's nothing there that says, maybe, Lord, what should we do here? That's a problem. Right? Joshua gives the leadership. Yes, God has told them to take over, but with Jericho, God gave pretty explicit instructions. Didn't stop to ask God here. Makes his own decision. All right, there's the first problem here. So the number of troops that Joshua sends to Ai was not the contributing factor here in Israel's eventual defeat. It's going to look at the end there, verse number 4, right? Sent 3,000, and they fled before the men of Ai. So they lose. Okay, they lose this battle. And it wasn't the men, essentially, here, the number of men that caused the unexpected outcome for Joshua. Their problem was maybe not even overconfidence in their military, or maybe even a bad assessment. Those guys knew war, right? They probably were right on not needing all the people. The problem, of course, that we know is that apparently Joshua and his leaders are failing to ask whether all of Israel had been faithful to God on the attack of Jericho, or asking God anything at all. We see none of that happening here. Had all of the soldiers refrained from taking the plunder from Jericho that God had specifically commanded them not to do, would they have won the battle of Ai? Maybe. Right? Maybe if they had followed through, if Joshua still doesn't ask God, there's no transgression really there, they'd probably win the battle. Right? But because one old boy decided he wanted to do what he wanted to do, now we've got a problem amongst the children here of Israel. The leadership presumably didn't know that. If Joshua had stopped before he sent the people on up to Ai and asked God, what's next? Do you not think God would have revealed in some form or fashion the sin of Achan so it could have been taken care of, so that then they could go to Ai and conquer it correctly? Yes. We can assume that would have taken place. But the leader, Joshua, never consults God. We've got people in the camp sinning against God, and we're only one battle in to this conquering of the Promised Land. They should have trusted God to be faithful to his warnings to bring them trouble for violating his command, knowing that God is always faithful to both promises and warnings. And that should have caused them to be overly cautious before moving on to attack Ai. Right? At the very least, they should have at least asked. Should have at least went to the Lord concerning Israel's faithfulness of a nation. So now we see, go ahead, Chad, God demonstrating his faithfulness. On the other end of it, him following through with the warnings of their unfaithfulness, right? So, last part of verse 4, the fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai in verse 5 there smote of them about 36 men, for they chased them from before the gate, even up to Shebarim, and smote them in the going down. Wherefore the hearts of the people melted and became as water. God caused Israel's army to flee the soldiers of Ai, right? So we see that at the end of verse 4. And in response to their fleeing, their retreat, how many soldiers died? Verse 5 tells us, right? The men smote of them about how many? 36. So now 36 soldiers are dead in defeat. The Ai warriors chased down the Israelites as they descended back down to Israel's camp. And 36 kind of seems like inconsequential. I mentioned the 1,000 or whatever, the several thousand they went over there. But if you are one of the husbands or wives or moms or dads or whatever of one of those people that died, it's not inconsequential, right? It's a big deal. Those people had family members, right? They were fathers and husbands and sons and brothers, so it was very much a big deal and completely avoidable. So naturally, the mournful families of those 36, how's that going to affect the morale in Israel's camp? 36 families now that are very upset. It's going to be a problem for the camp. The reverberating joy from the victory over Jericho was now silenced as a thick, dark cloud of defeat settled over the camp. And the hearts of the people, verse 5, did what? What does it say at the very end of verse 5? What did their hearts do?
Melted.
And became as water. Go over to Joshua chapter 2. Go to verse 8. And we remember this, right? But we'll read it again. And before they were laid down, she came up to him on the roof, verse 9, and said unto the men, I know the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings and the Amorites, and that you were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, what did the Jerichoites' hearts do? Melted, right? So why did the hearts of the inhabitants of Jericho melt? Because they had what? Seen what God had done. Right? And concluded that their God couldn't keep up. In reality, Israel's defeat that they just took, to a certain degree, should have encouraged them. Because it should have shown to them that God was indeed faithful. Oh man, we didn't do it right, and these people died. God told us if we didn't do it right, there was going to be problems. It should have been an encouragement to them. And God is really going to do what he says he's going to do, because he's also told us that if we'll just listen to him, all of this is ours anyways, right? So this should have been an added encouragement to them. If he had let them defeat Ai with sin in the camp, then it would have showed that God was in fact unfaithful. His warnings about heeding to his commands concerning the plunder of Jericho would have been exposed as merely a toothless wolf, right, out in the wilderness. And that would have shown God's unfaithfulness. So the people should have examined themselves for the unfaithfulness. Why is it dangerous to conclude that God has been unfaithful to us or to the Israelites, either one? Why would it be so dangerous to conclude that God is unfaithful to heeding to his promises of judgment for warnings of sin. Why would it be a dangerous thing to do? Let me ask it a different way. Maybe it's a confusing way to ask it. Why is it dangerous to consider God like the toothless wolf? A lot of barking, not a lot of bite. What does it do?
We're unchecked and do what we want.
We become unchecked and do what we want. Okay. I like that. What else? Anything in?
Pride in assuming that we didn't do anything, but he did.
Okay, a pride in assuming that we didn't do anything wrong and that he did. Okay. It keeps a person from, if that's the case, it keeps a person from understanding the deficiencies of their own selves, right? Because you can impart those deficiencies on God. Because God didn't follow through with what he said he was, it affects your relationship with God on every level. When you consider that, or if you treat God, now if that's not the case, right? God is not going to do that. But if you have that mindset in which you treat him, well, I can do this, and this, and that's okay because God really doesn't care. He's not going to, yes, he is, but if that's how we justify the sin in our lives, like Achan does here, it becomes and shows a deficiency that we have, but we won't accept that, and then it affects the relationship we have with God on all levels. God will always judge sin. Because he has to, or he wouldn't be God. So why do we and the Israelites continue to live like and make decisions like God's not going to judge the sin? See, there's the problem, right? That's the disconnect that comes. It becomes a hindrance, right? A problem, a stepping stone, a stumbling block in our growth, in our relationship with our Father. Verse number 6. Go ahead, Chad. So, Joshua then, because this defeat happens, right? And God's not that long ago, hours beforehand, maybe, or not hours, but days beforehand, has pretty much told Joshua, hey, do what I ask, things are going to be fine, and things are going to be taken care of. So now Joshua just makes the decision to go forward with this, and now they got 36 people dead, families are upset. So Joshua, verse number 6, has some questions. Let's go there. And Joshua rent his clothes and fell to the earth upon his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, or eventide. He and the elders of Israel put dust upon their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? Would to God we had been content and dwelt on the other side of Jordan. O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turns their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it, and shall environ us around, and cut off our name from the earth. And what wilt thou do unto thy great name? Before God talked to Joshua about the true cause of Israel's defeat, he allowed Joshua to voice his heart. Right? That's what he's doing here in verses 6 through 8. And Joshua's words here revealed what he thought might be the reasons for the loss. Now, all of his reasons that he talks about here, either directly or indirectly, are questioning God's faithfulness. Okay? Now, I think Joshua's a little overdramatic here. And there's some stuff that I think is a little overdramatic. Okay, a little much, but that was his response. First thing he does, rend his clothes, verse 6, put dust on his head to demonstrate heartfelt remorse. Falls down before the ark and the covenant of God, and then once he's done this thing, he begins to vent his frustrations to God. Now, we know that verse 6, that Joshua what is his posture here? He's like down, right? Very, very much down. And the reason for that posture is to show his reverence to God. Okay? Now, even though he is displaying some frustrations, and getting some, he's still doing it in a sign of reverence and showing his posture was a sign of reverence as he is betraying his frustration to God. First question in verse 7. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan to then deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? So first thing here, Joshua thought that perhaps God was being what?
Unkind, mean.
Unfaithful, right? Joshua here is a little accusatory. He is towards God, thinking that God has been unfaithful. Why bring us over here? Why bring us across the Jordan River just to have us be destroyed by the Amorites? Okay. That's the first question. That's, I think, is a little fussy. Up to this point, what was God's track record? Perfect the whole time. Right? Joshua had just watched these humongous walls on an elemental level separate and turn to nothing. And he has the audacity to ask God, why don't you bring us over and get us killed for? To me, I think he needs a smack, right? But God doesn't treat it that way. Because God's obviously sovereign wisdom, much reacts to things much better than we do. He is questioning God's abilities and God's motives. Right? From the crossing of the Red Sea to the crossing of the Jordan, God had been faithful in all of his dealings with Israel's. We don't even have to name some of the ways. Stopping the Jordan River, crossing the Red Sea, bringing the plagues, feeding them for 40 years, on the list goes. Joshua had no prior evidence to God ever not being faithful to Israel. The idea that he even can ask God such a question is totally and incredibly absurd. He had witnessed. How many things had Joshua himself witnessed of all the faithful acts since they had left Israel? Joshua is essentially questioning God's power, God's sovereignty, and his wisdom. He's also questioning his love, his faithfulness, and his holiness. How could you bring us here just to get us killed? Like just reading that, as I was reading through this week, it irritated me. Come on, Joshua. Don't be that guy. Second question, also verse 7. Would to God we had been content and dwelt on the other side of the Jordan. O Lord, what shall I say when the Israel turns their backs before their enemies? There in verse 7b. Right. Secondly, Joshua here is questioning whether the Israelites had pushed their luck, essentially. Right? Had they already gone too far, gone as far as God as they could with him? Should they have quit while they were ahead and been just content to live on the east side of Jordan? Right? We have been content and dwell on the other side of the Jordan River. Israel would have never been better off by stopping short of obeying God in order to reduce their risk. Second problem I have here with Joshua's questions. What had God just a week before told Joshua to do? Go in and do what to the land of Canaan? How much of it? Just the eastern side? Just Jericho? Just the bottom third? Just 2/3 of it? No. He told him specifically, you're going to go in, and as long as you're faithful, you are to conquer all of the promised land for the nation of Israel. And now, the first little problem here, the very first time, they get a little pushback because of their own fault. Joshua says, maybe we should have just stayed back over here and stopped. Did we go too far? I know you just told me to go on all of it, but maybe we shouldn't have. Maybe you are wrong. The second question of God's faithfulness was equally as offensive as the first one was. For it was God who led the Israelites across the Jordan River. Regretting coming across the river was a backdoor slam on God's leadership, because God was the one that told him to go. Shows a lack of faith in both the ability and the character of God, in a roundabout way, essentially blaming God for the death of those 36 soldiers. That's what he's doing. For Joshua to be content to stay on the eastern side of the Jordan River would not have been admirable. Neither would it have been a sign that he was a humble leader who loved God's people too much to put them in harm's way. To follow God into the promised land, yes, takes a lot of faith. Yes, takes a lot of courage. And yes, we've seen Joshua being that up to this point. But at the first sign of some friction, Joshua begins to reveal a little bit of his human nature. Stepping out and away from comfort of Jordan and into a place with high risk, Joshua had already exercised his faith by crossing the Jordan River, and he needed to continue to trust God fully, because who had not changed? God, who will not change. So where had the change obviously had to have taken place? Somewhere back in the camp of Israel. But Joshua was not self-aware enough to take a second to think, oh man, what did we do wrong? We don't see that pop up, right? That's not Joshua's first question. He watched these 36 guys die, and he's like, oh no. What did we do wrong? No. His instant response is to do what? Blame God. Blame the faithful one. If I was God, I'm not, thankfully. If I was God, I probably would have struck Joshua dead on the spot and found me another guy. But thankfully, God doesn't think like that, right? He doesn't have that vindictive characteristics that we have. Because that's exactly what I would have done. No, he lets Joshua do what? What's God letting him do? He's letting him vent, right? He's letting him get this stuff off of his chest. Joshua was he was asking these questions, but he was not going to find, essentially, an answer for Israel's defeat in any deficiency in God's plan. Why is a cautious, better than safe attitude not a wise attitude when it comes to following God's leading? Why is a cautious, better safe than sorry attitude not a wise attitude to have when it comes to following God's leading? What does it limit? Sticking the toes in the water to feel what it's like of the leadership of God. What does that limit?
Shows a lack of faith.
Shows a lack of faith, right? Shows a lack of trust in God's ability and his character. And it limits both how far one will follow God and what in turn God can do. Right? God told Joshua to go, to lead the people, right? And walk across the Jordan River and go in and walk across Jericho all these times and continue to do what I ask you to do. He didn't tell Joshua to slowly go up and take time to think. No, he simply said, if you'll just listen and go, then I'll take care of it. Initially in Jericho, we see Joshua. He wasn't testing the water. He jumped in cannonball size. Full on, let's go. That's what God says to do. But he doesn't take the time. He gets a little too confident in his own leadership abilities and what God has blessed him with internally anyways. And says, you know what? I can make the decision to go face Ai. It didn't take him long to puff the chest up. And then he has the audacity to blame God for when things go wrong. Choosing to be content. So now Joshua wanting to just go back, right? We should have stayed. Wanting to be content to where he was at, not follow through. Choosing to be content violates God's will. God is not pleased with contentment when it is accompanied with passive refusal to move forward and to do his will. Contentment leads to complacency. Right? And complacency leads to what? I've said this a lot up here. Probably not in a few years, I guess, but this will be something I need to say a lot. Contentment leads to complacency. Complacency leads to what?
Don't move forward. Just stay with
Stagnation. Right? Becoming stagnant. And we all know what stagnant water does. What's stagnant water have in it? No good stuff, right? That's where the mosquitoes like to hang out, right? And the bugs, and the nasty, and the maggots, and all that kind of stuff, right? Because there is no life. There's no running water. It just sits there. It doesn't go anywhere. Eventually, the old sun comes down and does what to that stagnant pool? It dried up. Ain't nothing left. Same thing happens or can happen to us if we become complacent in where we're at with our relationship with God. Always forward. Doesn't matter the obstacles, the valleys, the times, the mess ups, the problems. Always forward, growing closer. Can't go stagnant if you're always moving. That's the problem with Joshua's second question. We'll do questions 3 and 4 next week, okay? And then Achan's unfaithfulness. It's almost we got to get moving. Let's pray. All right, Heavenly Father, thank you for this lesson, for this time, for what we can look at here, and the ability, Lord, just to be able to kind of see Joshua's response to this and your response to him, and just how this is essentially a mirror image of what our relationship with you looks like when we are not being obedient. So I pray, Lord, we can look from this, we can glean from this, we can see the importance of learning from this lesson from Joshua and applying these things to our own lives as well. Pray for Pastor Rob as he comes here the next little bit as well. We have our service this next hour. We love you and thank you for what you do for us. Share and pray. Amen.